Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us this week. A lot to talk about. We have a president who seems out of control in terms of busting through the constitutional restraints that typically prevent presidents from really fomenting the worst possible attacks on his political opponents. I'm going to talk about that crisis and what is bound up in it, which is the outrageous, illegal, in my view, illicit and unprecedented raid on President Trump, more government misconduct to talk about there. Plus, Judicial Watch has a significant announcement on the settlement of a key case related to parental rights, the First Amendment, and critical race theory. You're going to want to hear the details there. First up is the continuing crisis here in Washington, D.C., caused by the Biden administration's approach that if you're a political enemy of the Biden administration, the rules of the road, the rules of the law, the Constitution, traditional notions of civil rights and the protections they entail in terms of being protected from abusive and political criminal investigations don't apply. And for the last several weeks, you've had outrageous rhetoric from President Biden and his White House and other officials suggesting that any supporter of Donald Trump is a threat to the democracy, a threat to the nation, and of course the implicit outcome of that type of rhetoric is that anything is justified against them, including looks like a raid on your home if you're President Trump. We had just this week President Biden make a political speech essentially saying what I just said, that anyone who supports Trump policies, which happens to be about half the country, he considers to be outside the family of citizenship as far as he's concerned. He talks about them being a threat to our Constitution and to our democracy. And in the case of this speech, and I normally don't talk about presidential speeches because most of them aren't terribly interesting, but I encourage you to look at this one in the least, and you can listen to the angry tone of it. But it is, it has all of these echoes of totalitarianism in the lighting, in the misuse of troops with him during this political speech. That has echoes of the worst part of Germany, the worst part of the Soviet Union, Mao's China, all that kind of weird totalitarian shtick. And it's something that I've never seen before in modern American history. Now, if you're a foreign national, you may recognize strongman type of speeches with this type of atmosphere, but it's certainly something that's been alien to America until now. So I'm calling it the red speech, because, and I think we have a picture of two that will show you just how extraordinarily disturbing that imagery was. I mean, how is it anyone can look at this and think this is an appropriate kind of atmosphere for a president of a republic to be talking in with this lighting and such? And I don't want to overstate it, but when you combine it with really a call to attack or to justify attacks, political repression, and I think potentially violence on your political opponents, it's disturbing. And this is on top of President Biden. He just raided the home of his putative political opponent for 2024, obviously his predecessor as president. And I know literally he didn't raid the home, but literally he's responsible for it. He's also proposing to spend anywhere from, depending on how you slice the numbers, 300 to 600 billion to upwards of $1 trillion to pay off the debts of student loan borrowers, and a policy which hasn't been approved by Congress. So he's proposing to spend $1 trillion, as much as $1 trillion, based on fiat. That's not what presidents do. That's what dictators do. And and as I noted, when he and his administration raided Trump's home, they crossed a Rubicon. And so after crossing that Rubicon, I guess it's not surprising that we would see a speech like President Biden gave, viciously attacking half the country. And this wasn't a philosophical disagreement. This was, you support this politician, therefore you're not one of us. And it helps explain why this administration, or the basis for this administration targeting, for instance, those who had concerns about the 2020 election and were trying to exercise their rights under the law to challenge it. Now they're saying, well, that's not something you're allowed to do, and you're going to be prosecuted and investigated by our Justice Department. And you have the abuses of the January 6th committee, again, targeting people in retaliation, it looks like, for First Amendment protected speech. So I wrote a book for Judicial Watch. Our book is the most recent book, Republic Under Assault, a few years ago, and it helps you understand how we got here. But our republic is under assault in ways we haven't seen in modern history. And this president's embrace of this totalitarian approach, this authoritarian approach to describing his political enemies, again, it's not that I'm disagreeing, the politics of it, obviously, I personally have issues with. But from Judicial Watch's perspective, it explains the government corruption and abuse we're seeing. So what we try to do is expose and stop government corruption and abuse, whether it be exposing the truth about the raid of Trump, trying to figure out what went on January 6th in a responsible way, figuring out how it happened, who's responsible, as opposed to taking the Pelosi rump 1/6 committee approach, which is just using it as a pretext to target one's political enemies. Whatever the topic, you're seeing all this abuse of government and abuse of power. Now we're getting fuller explanations for it, and further, it seems to me, rhetorical devices being used to justify suppressing your political enemies, justify raiding the home of your political enemies. This is an unpleasant time for America, and pray for the country. But the good news is the rule of law still matters. As Judicial Watch has explained, as I've explained, as soon as the raid happened, Judicial Watch leapt into action to try to gain access to the records about the raid, sought the court permission to unseal the information. The Biden administration, of course, opposed this, didn't want any of it coming out, but we forced it all out over their objections. Not all of it. Some of it is still redacted, and we may fight more on that. But we got the warrant. We got the affidavit. The documents show, in my view, that there was no good faith basis for raiding the president's home. It was all pretextual, or making it up in the sense of misstating what the law was in terms of how records can be handled by a former president, and I think misleading the court in getting that warrant approved. And then the next big vindication of the rule of law came with President Trump's separate action in Florida, seeking a special master, which is essentially a judicial official, a judicial appointed official, that would review some of the documents for, to make sure that they don't have anything they're not supposed to have. I'm trying to summarize here. And of course, the Justice Department didn't want the court to even consider that. And they said, but Trump has no position. He doesn't even have the standing to request that. And the court rejected it. So we've had now two courts reject extreme Biden Justice Department legal positions to justify the raid, or to protect information about the raid, or in the case of Trump, protecting Trump's rights that resulted as a result that were harmed as a result of the raid. And the Justice Department lost on both measures. So you've had two courts push back on the Justice Department's raid in a way that normally doesn't happen. I mean, if you're the subject typically of a federal criminal investigation, your home gets raided, you know, the Justice Department has you in their sights, and you start asking questions of the Justice Department, demanding access and accountability, typically the courts don't look favorably on that. You don't want to be a defendant or the target of Justice Department criminal investigation in our federal court system. It's designed to let the Justice Department and the prosecutors essentially try to gather evidence and move along things to get their case done. And so it's kind of hard to kind of assert your rights in an aggressive way. I guess it's not hard to do it technically, but in terms of getting good results, it's usually difficult. And the fact that President Trump was able to get the results he did, the fact that Judicial Watch was able to get the results we did, is because not only of great lawyering by Judicial Watch lawyers, of course, but because the raid is suspect. The raid is legally sketchy. The arguments that the Justice Department has used to justify the raid are sketchy and weak. I've reviewed, for instance, part of the fight with President Trump in this other court case about the special master is required the Justice Department to file this document explaining itself. And of course it was full of innuendo, misleading descriptions of the state of the law, allegations and suggestions that had really no fair basis of criminality by President Trump and people close to him. It's a propaganda document. And how do I know it's a propaganda document? Because they added one of the most, I think it will, again, this raid will go down in infamy. And one of the reasons it will go down in infamy is because of the seeming misconduct, obvious misconduct, by the Justice Department. And they included, to try to kind of scare the court and provide propaganda material for their allies in the left media, this picture of allegedly secret material that they found in the facilities there at Mar-a-Lago. And I think we're going to post the picture here so you can see it up close. Now, I say it's staged. Now, do I know beyond a shadow of a doubt it's staged? No, but I think based on the fact that I have 2 brain cells, I think it's staged. It's obviously staged. Does anyone seriously believe they found the documents there like that? So, and these documents are supposed to be classified, and they just took them out and put them on the floor like that? Who are they fooling? So they took this document, this opportunity to tell the court why they had a good faith basis to target Trump and what they did and how careful they were, to make a joke and make a mockery of the process by putting in this propaganda photo staged to try to embarrass Trump and force court action. And it just shows you how unprofessional the Justice Department and the FBI are, and why they can't be trusted to handle politically sensitive investigations like this. And it further suggests or confirms that this investigation, as I noted, is conceived in sin. And now they're breaking, when you kind of do something wrong, in order to keep it going, like most improper enterprises, you have to keep on doing additional things that are wrong. And so I, for instance, have never seen, I've been doing this work for nearly 24 years, I've never seen a document, a cover document like that, even in a FOIA context where stuff has been declassified. I mean, just the documents themselves, just the kind of the way they look, the volume, I think is even useful potentially to bad guys who, if they believe this material is classified, why would they show pictures of it like this? To me, it's inherently risky. So there are two conclusions, or maybe there's probably more than two conclusions. But one conclusion is they don't think it's really classified, so who cares? They're just trying to get their pound of flesh and make Trump look bad, try to distract from their unprecedented raid and the fact there was no good faith basis for it. Or maybe they do think it's classified. Maybe they do think it's serious, but they don't care because it's worth getting Trump to put our national security at risk. And again, I would remind you, and I don't know if President Trump has been as direct as I've been here in his legal pleadings, or at least the pleadings I've been able to read to date, that these records aren't classified. So when you see records that are classified in the home of the president, let's put it this way, in the least it's disputed that they're classified. Because as I have said and I've highlighted, there was this case in here in Washington, D.C. that Judicial Watch was involved in and involved Bill Clinton. He had tapes that had recordations of his conversations, at least his side of the conversation, for instance, with foreign leaders, which are all presumptively classified. And they weren't concerned about that when we sued, because we thought, well, you know, aren't these presidential records just like they're saying about Trump? And the government came back and said no. Now, I know many of you have heard this analysis before, but it bears it bears repeating, especially since the Justice Department continues to mislead and misdirect about this law. And the court found in response to our request that the archives be required at least to ask for this information, saying there's no basis to do that. The archives doesn't have the power to demand documents from a president that has decided to keep documents as personal after he leaves. The government lawyer told the court, hey, the president has these records. He didn't turn them over at the end of his term, so they're presumptively personal. Why didn't they take that approach? Because that's the law, and that was the Justice Department position, and it changed on a dime to go after Trump. So that's the theory, that all of these records are personal records. That's been the position of the Justice Department in a similar case. It seems to be the precedent of the courts that have looked at this most carefully, at least in the District of Columbia, the key circuit there. And so that would be the position I'd take. Now, the other big issue is the improper nature of the warrant itself. As I said, there was really no good faith basis for it because these were personal records, so to tell a court otherwise is dishonest in my view. But on top of that, they went in there and sought records way beyond what, in my view, they should have been able to seek. And one of the results of this court process about the special master has been the requirement that a more complete inventory of the records that were seized at Trump's home be released. And that inventory was released. I'm presuming it's correct, but because it's the FBI, I don't trust that it's necessarily correct. But it confirms that they took thousands of records that weren't classified, but were, quote, government records. As I say, if that's the case, then they were probably his. And that there were lots of records that were obviously personal. They took, 1,000 pages plus, I think, of newspaper articles going back to 2008. They took books. They took clothing. They took what was obvious to them personal gifts because they listed them as, clothing/personal gifts. So what type of warrant allows someone to go in, a law enforcement officer to go in and vacuum up all these obviously unrelated records? I think an improper warrant. And it further suggests that maybe they just wanted to get everything they could possibly get. And they really were just using the Presidential Records Act and this manufactured dispute about the records as a pretext to get in there and just see what he had. And sure enough, that's what they did. They took out everything they could. And despite the court saying she is interested in appointing a special master, Despite the court being suspicious of whether they appropriately protected the president's records that there's no doubt they weren't allowed to have, they continue to review these records. In fact, they've escalated it and said now there's a damage assessment going on with the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and they're sharing some of these allegedly classified records with them in order, again, to make it seem like there is this national security crisis with Trump having records that he had every right under the law to have. And let's say he didn't have rights to these records. He certainly had a good faith understanding that these records typically are treated as personal. And if the government wanted to allege they're classified, I guess the government can allege anything. But the idea that you would go in and say these records are such and therefore should be subject to a warrant, when in fact there is a dispute about the very nature of the records, a dispute the government refuses to acknowledge, but they carefully word their briefs that suggests that they do know what I'm talking about. Because, for instance, they reference records as being marked as classified. They avoid calling them classified records. They reference records as being government records. Now, this may be a little in the weeds, but for those of us who work in the records business and the quote government records business, that's a phrase that no one really uses. Like a layman may use it, or someone who's not familiar with the records process in Washington, D.C., but the FBI knows that the phrase government records really doesn't have much of a meaning. We've got presidential records, we have federal records, we have agency records. Government records, as you can, I think, see, doesn't really tell you anything. So they're playing games, even this inventory. So what you should recognize is that all the court filings the Justice Department have been making are propaganda filings designed to justify politically their political raid, and hopefully in a way that convinces a court to give them a pass. Thankfully, the courts are seemingly skeptical, so I don't know how far that's going to go in terms of policing them, but that's something that you should understand as you evaluate these things. I know, given the fact that many of you are clear-thinking Americans, you kind of guessed that there's something up. I mean, you have the president raiding the home of a former president. That obviously is sketchy. But believe you me, that when you examine the legal basis here and what the government's putting out, I mean, I read this brief. So even though I'm not a lawyer, as everyone on Twitter once likes to tell me, I did look at this record. I did look at this document by the government, and it's crap. You don't have to be a lawyer to see that it's political. You can be a citizen who, again, can read, and you can see they're being dishonest, leaving out key information, begging questions in this filing. Now, the left would like you to believe that no one is allowed to question the Justice Department or the FBI. And, of course, that's not the way America works, and that's not the way Judicial Watch works. Because our experience with the Justice Department and the FBI is that they're corrupt agencies, top to bottom. And does it mean everyone in there is corrupt? Of course not. But institutionally, again, top to bottom, they are corrupt. So if there are good people in there, it really doesn't matter to the operations of the organization, because they're immaterial to what the organization does, both at the Justice Department and at the FBI. So yes, we're going to question the FBI, and we're going to question what went on. Now, the president has filed some briefs, and I think it's worth sharing some of the points he made in his brief, and I liked how he opened up this particular brief. Politics in opposing or seeking judicial oversight of what the government did here with the special master. Politics cannot be allowed to impact the administration of justice. President Donald J. Trump is the clear frontrunner in the 2024 Republican presidential primary and the 2024 general election, should he decide to run. Beyond that, his endorsement in the 2022 midterm elections has been decisive for Republican candidates. But on August 8, 2022, in a shockingly aggressive move, and with no understanding of the distress that it would cause most Americans, roughly 24 special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, directed by attorneys at the U.S. Department of Justice, the government, raided the home of President Donald J. Trump. According to the government, the agent seized documents, privileged and/or potentially privileged materials, and other items, including photos, handwritten notes, and even President Trump's passports, that were outside the lawful reach of an already overbroad warrant. President Trump, like all citizens, is protected by the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. Property seized in violation of his constitutional rights must be returned forthwith. Law enforcement is a shield that protects Americans. It can't be used as a weapon for political purposes. Therefore, we seek judicial assistance in the aftermath of an unprecedented and unnecessary raid on President Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago. And they're going to seemingly get some of that judicial assistance unless the court completely changes her approach that was explained preliminarily in a document, a court order, and then more fully in a court hearing that took place. It looks like she's going to grant a special master that will at least review some of this material. I mean, the danger is that the government's going to keep on doing what the government does. The Biden administration wants to get Trump, and so the court may slow things down, but they've decided that they need to prosecute or Trump or people around him for political purposes. And that's the concern that millions of Americans have. And if they continue doing that, that to me is destabilizing to the rule of law, our constitutional system and such. So to target someone who is acting innocently, in the sense of acting in good faith, trying to turn over documents, there being a genuine dispute about what the documents are and who has a right to them. Instead, they played games, and they tried to, and they did set them up by their, frankly, it looks like their own admission, in order to justify raids and allegations of criminal conduct, however ill-founded. This is the Justice Department. This is the FBI. This is the Biden White House, which it's now been found intervened and provided help at key moments to keep this investigation going. An investigation, as I said, was conceived in sin. The National Archives, it looks like, had no authority under law to demand any records from President Trump once he decided he wanted to keep them. And yet, because he was cooperative, they used that cooperation against him. Aha! He turned them over, and he didn't say they weren't classified, so that means he thinks they were classified. Or even if he thought they were classified, even though we know they really weren't classified, we should prosecute him and people around him because he misunderstood whether they were truly classified or not. That's the thinking of the Justice Department. It's gangster government. They're going to get you no matter what. And, I know there's going to be all these legal arguments, and I've kind of raised a few of them with you here, hopefully in a non-confusing way. But in the end, just remember, it was a political raid. It had no good faith basis. If it wasn't over documents, it would have been over something else they manufactured. And it's about destroying Trump. They tried to do it with Russia. They tried to do it with Ukraine to protect Biden. They tried to do it with January 6th. Didn't work. So now they're trying to do it again with this document fiasco, which I think is probably not working either, again, thanks to Judicial Watch and other people who stand for the rule of law. So I suspect they'll go back to January 6th for a little bit, and then they'll take a pause at the election and figure out what else they need to do. But that's where we are. It's not about the rule of law. It's about political abuse of those who we entrust to run the law, and that's the crisis that we're facing constitutionally. And you can be sure that Judicial Watch will continue to hold that whole gang accountable. We filed material in court. We've been educating the public. We sued for records about the raid already. More lawsuits are coming, you can be sure. And we're not going to stand down. We're not going to be intimidated. We're going to stand up for the rule of law. It's not just about protecting President Trump. It's about protecting our system. He was an elected president who is being punished for being an elected president and being told that the rules and the laws that affect every other president doesn't apply to him. That's the very definition of government misconduct and abuse. We have to stop it. We've been leading the way in trying to defend the rule of law on this massive scandal, the worst government scandal in American history, the targeting of Trump, which continues, and we're not going to give up. And we do it with your support. And again, if you think this issue is important, I encourage you to look at these documents I'm talking about, look at the lawsuits Judicial Watch is filing, look at the educational materials Judicial Watch is putting out there, share this video. Do something simple like that, and of course support our work with your most generous financial contribution. And I'm going to show you why you should support Judicial Watch in this next discussion. Well, we had a nice little victory on behalf of our client, Coach Dave Flynn in Dedham, Massachusetts, who was the Dedham football coach, the high school football coach, until he was fired for complaining about CRT propaganda and Black Lives Matter propaganda in his 7th grade daughter's world geography and ancient history class. He didn't know about the curriculum. He and his wife didn't know about the change. The teacher, it was virtual learning at the time, I think, had a Black Lives Matter virtual promotion. And they thought that was completely inappropriate. And they went and complained. And in response to the complaint and in retaliation for the complaint, as alleged in our lawsuit, civil rights lawsuit that we filed against the leadership of the district, they fired him as a football coach. And the good news is they settled. So the case proceeded. We took depositions. The lower court didn't want the case to go forward, so we appealed. But even though they were in a strong position because they had won initially, they still settled the case. And the superintendent wrote a very nice letter as part of the settlement, to be clear, to Coach Flynn. The superintendent acknowledged the important and valid issues raised by Flynn and specific changes in school policies because of his complaint, including the banning of teachers promoting Black Lives Matter to students online. Again, we have filed this lawsuit back in 2021. And now it's over, and it's over because our client, A, fought in court, and in turn, in response, they settled the lawsuit with him, acknowledging his concerns, changing the policies, and getting a good result in terms of policy. Dear Dave, I hope this is the full letter. I hope, or at least part of the full letter. I hope you and your family are well. I'm writing this letter to acknowledge the important and valid issues you raised regarding the Dedham Public Schools and a subsequent lawsuit you filed in federal court. I'm pleased that we were able to amicably settle this matter after the recently filed appeal of the court's decision, as I described to you. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge and validate the concerns you initially raised regarding your daughter's experience at Dedham Middle School. You had every right to inquire about these issues, and you followed the appropriate steps in attempting to learn more. You correctly pointed out that the 7th grade social studies curriculum had significantly changed, and parents were not informed of these changes. In probing this matter further, you discovered the district's website did not accurately reflect the new curriculum content, and parents were unable to understand what was being taught. Your legitimate questions prompted additional conversations at the school committee level that ultimately led to the establishment of a curriculum advisory committee that now brings together parents, community members, and district educators to broadly review and more thoroughly communicate curriculum changes and concerns. Curriculum updates are a necessary and important part of the work of school districts, and effectively communicating these improvements as a critical component of the process. Your initial inquiry triggered a larger internal conversation about the district's oversight in the teaching of these new curriculum units. More specifically, the sequencing of the curriculum's identity unit and the virtual use of a Black Lives Matter emoji t-shirt by a teacher sparked a series of intense conversations about teacher autonomy and the importance of balanced messaging and viewpoints in the classroom. As you pointed out, positive intentions can often have unintended negative impacts on students. Ultimately, I directed staff to remove these t-shirt emojis and instructed them to not wear these in the classroom in the future. So no more Black Lives Matter propaganda in the classroom, at least via t-shirt. Finally, I understand that you raised these concerns at the classroom level. You left that initial conversation expecting to hear directly from the building principal. It appears that this was unclear within the school, and you did not hear back in a timely manner. I'm sorry for this breakdown. Effective two-way dialogue among parents and school staff is the foundation of mutual trust. While we pride ourselves on this connection, in this particular instance, this fueled frustration and identified room for improvement. I regret that these initial justifiable concerns ultimately led to where we are today. As you have indicated, I appreciated your recognition of the opportunity to have improved the trajectory of this sequence. With this settlement, I hope we are able to put any divisions behind us and begin the important work of healing through better conversations and listening. I recognize the school district's opportunity to improve based upon the issues you identified, and I thank you for raising them. As educators, I believe we can always learn from our experiences. Thank you for your many years of dedicated commitment to the development of student athletes at Dedham. Sincerely, Michael J. Welch, Superintendent. Well, I guess we could have asked for a better letter, but I can't imagine we could have gotten one. This was a good settlement, and I would encourage you to review that letter and ask yourselves, are your school systems operating similarly in terms of communicating with parents about these controversial curriculum issues, such as critical race theory and Black Lives Matter agenda setting? And I suspect too many aren't. But this is sort of a best practices letter, don't you think? That Coach Flynn, at great cost, was able to achieve through this settlement of this remarkable civil rights lawsuit. As I said, this is a remarkable victory for Coach Flynn, as his federal civil rights lawsuit resulted in the Dedham School District admitting that he was absolutely right to be concerned about the districts introducing a new controversial CRT style curriculum without parental notice or involvement. Coach Flynn also appreciates that the teachers will no longer be able to use virtual learning to push Black Lives Matter symbols, and it shouldn't take, though, a federal civil rights lawsuit for the school district to do the right thing. We hope that other school officials take note that they must treat parents and their concerns about curriculum with respect and avoid radical indoctrination of their children. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And Coach Flynn said the following: "The past 2 years have been difficult for me and my family. I thank my family, friends, and everyone else who reached out for their continued support." I mean, Coach Flynn had phenomenal support with his former players and his fellow members of the community there, which is tightly knit. With Judicial Watch's help, I can move on from this challenging situation, knowing that by raising my concerns through the appropriate channels, I made a difference for the students and families of Dedham Public Schools. I hope other parents can learn from this and not back down from fighting for what is best for their families. So that was a good outcome for Coach Flynn. And was it a perfect outcome? It was a settlement. But you can see he's pleased. I mean, he fought the fight and he achieved some results that not only vindicate his role here, but will end up protecting other parents and other students from these challenges that his daughter faced in dealing with this crazed curriculum that was being pushed down their throats. Now, as I've been saying, or as I've often observed here, this CRT issue, that's the pandemic we have to worry about. It's in our schools, it's in our military, it's in our government at all levels, it's in our corporations, it's in our media culture, and it's this sort of casual racist approach to treating American citizens. that some citizens are to be vilified because of their race, and others are to be patronized and treated as victims because of their race. Not because of anything they've done in terms of being terrible or wonderful, simply because of their race. So in the case of critical race theory, they demonize whites while patronizingly victimize blacks simply based on race. And they say everything that our system is about, everything our government's about, everything this country's about is systemically racist and needs to be overturned. And of course, that's a Marxist, communist, revolutionary approach to America. That's what critical race theory is about. And earlier this month, for instance, you see elements of it in all sorts of peculiar ways. You had the Minneapolis school district and government there come up with a teacher's contract that specifically exempted minorities from layoffs. Typically, it was a layoff by seniority, meaning if you were more senior, you got a protection from layoffs. So first hired, first laid off, right? And in fact, though, if you were first hired but of a minority, you wouldn't be laid off. But if you were a white person, it looks like, you would be laid off. Outrageous discrimination. But that's the CRT way. And we're challenging that. In Asheville, North Carolina, they had a city scholarship that we challenged. It was funded by city taxpayers, and they said only minorities can apply. What? We fought that successfully. We've been exposing this critical race theory, racist propaganda being force-fed our military at West Point. We've sued at the U.S. Naval Academy. I can go on and on. You have segregation groups going on in Rhode Island, here in the District of Columbia in the schools. Montgomery County, they're talking about pushing critical race theory books on babies. The book was, quote, perfect for ages baby to age 3. Never too young to you may have heard the phrase red diaper baby. Well, CRT diaper baby. When it comes to political propaganda and brainwashing, it's never too early for the left. All of this is being exposed, and I could go on and on. We have other teachers we're representing for taking on or saying the wrong thing about this critical race theory, Black Lives Matter propaganda, or anything else the left doesn't like. All being fired in retaliation or suffering other harm. So we have all these series of lawsuits, and I don't think, I know, there's no one else that has as many lawsuits as Judicial Watch has in this area. So it doesn't get much more comprehensive than this. But this is the crisis we face. Because I tell you, they want to divide the country, not because they want to increase taxes, which they do, not because they have these small bore political interests. No, they want to divide the country because they want to destroy the country. As I said, this is Marxism at its heart, and that means it's revolutionary at its heart. And I don't mean revolutionary in to say, oh, well, this is a great new way of operating. No, it's talking about communism, which would be the destruction of our rights and our freedoms and our property, our right to worship, all sorts of things. And they want to destroy that through these critical theory agenda items. And they all have variations. You have critical feminist theory, you have critical queer theory, you have this transgender extremism. It's all designed to blow up the superstructure of Western civilization, especially the American way in that regard. And you can be sure that Judicial Watch will continue to man the front lines with your support as we defend the rule of law and our U.S. Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And with that, I'll see you here next week on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. I hope you have a wonderful Labor Day holiday, and get ready because there's a lot more work to do this fall. I'll see you here next time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.